call myself a researcher. I say it very lightly because when I was doing this, somebody says, "Oh, you're a Bigfoot researcher." And I'm like, "I am," because I didn't know I was. My uncle told me when I was little about Bigfoot that he might have saw one a long time ago, and I always believed him. I was really young, and then when I gotten older and I moved here from Sacramento, I thought, well, I went on the BFRO and looked it up where there would be a sighting around here, and then there was one down here on it's called La Jolla Indian Reservation. The guy had a sighting on the campground, and so I started researching over the internet on the maps and stuff, and I saw down the road, like about 5 miles down the road, there was the San Luis Rey River crosses the Highway 76, and then that there's a service road that cuts off a piece of the forest there, and I thought that would be a great place to be for a Bigfoot because they don't have to cross the highway to get water, and there's a lot of trees there, and there's a lot of food there, a lot of deer, a lot of possums and raccoons and everything there. And so I went up there to check it out, and that was my first incident that was there. I went there just by myself with my dog for 3 days, and it was kind of a wash at the end of the day, of the third day. And so I put my stuff all the way up at the road, and then I went across the highway to look down the other side of the bridge, and when I did, something was down there, but I couldn't see it, but it must have saw my feet and my dog, and I guess it was watching me for the last 3 days, and it was expecting me to come down underneath the bridge again, but I didn't. I was off to its left, and when it noticed me, it turned and hit a tree, and it knocked the tree down. It was so loud that I ran across the highway, and I left my stuff there, hid it behind a rock, and I took off. And then I asked my uncle to go camping there, and and then and so he went down there, and a lot of things have happened there too. We heard it walk across an area because he heard it, and then he heard the talking, and he described what it sounded like, and he didn't believe it in Bigfoot. I didn't tell him what happened before I went there, and since then he's passed away. Um, but he described what it sounded like, and he told me that he hears footsteps, and then I did some stuff, and it actually came out, and I couldn't see it, but I heard it. It walked across the creek, and it knocked on the tree once, and then it stood, and it walked across the creek again and stood where I have a picture of a Bigfoot's face, and you can see his body through the trees, but you could clearly see his face, and he stood there the rest of the night, and my uncle just went to bed. He thought I was hoaxing him or something, but I had nobody that would ever go through that creek in December, or even come out there at night really with me because I don't really hang out with anybody. But anyway, I had a lot of stuff happen. I have a video of a baby handprint. I have a baby footprint on picture. I have video of two cloaking, whatever these things are, subject with white glowing eyes. I have a video of that. I have sounds of Bigfoot's. I don't know. It sounds like if you have pop rocks and you threw them in your mouth and they're popping. That would sound like that. That's how they were vocalizing, with a lot of air behind it. And then they did a I had that on recording, and the incident following it. So I hid my recorder. I was there with my sister. It shows the whole thing through, and then I leave the recorder. The next day I come back, and then I follow into it with the sounds that I've gotten. I had video of a Bigfoot, but I couldn't see him because at nighttime. One running past me, and the other one threw a log at me. And that's the one with the 19-inch foot. I don't go see him. He's pretty aggressive. I have all kinds of stuff. I mean, there's so many different incidents that's happened. I got 17-inch footprints. I had a drone stuck up in a tree, and when I was trying to get the drone out of the tree, it was really high, and I couldn't get it out, and I stayed there all day. And then I when I was there trying to get it out, my dogs kept walking up and standing underneath the tree where I was throwing my thing, and I'm like, why are they doing that? And why are they looking at me? And so I'm like, and so I tied them up behind me, and I was kept doing it. And then I looked back, and they weren't looking at me; they were looking toward the creek, and I was found that kind of weird. And so I
Let's
heard
go
it.
back to that. Let's go back to that first incident because I want to get a little bit more detail. So the first time you were out there, you only heard something. You didn't see anything, right?
Right, right, yeah. That
Tell me
going
what
with my
tell me
uncle,
what you heard. Tell me what did it sound like?
the Bigfoot, or
Yes.
which
Yes.
one, with my uncle?
The first time you were out there before you went out there with your uncle.
The first one was all it was, just a tree knocking over, and then I just took off, and that was into that incident. That's when I knew that there was Bigfoot in that area, and then that's where I thought, okay, I can go here instead of going to campground and paying a campground fee every single time. I can just go down to the creek and do that service road. And I've done it for 12 years there.
Got it.
And
So
yeah,
you heard the tree go down or you saw the tree go down?
no, I just heard it because there was a tree, like when I was looking down, there's a guardrail, and then there's a street right here on my left. That's a bridge, and then I'm looking down right beside it, and then there was a tree covered up, a big old tree, and I couldn't see. All I saw was the creek and a little bit of the land on the other side, and then it must have saw me, and there was a tree right on the other side, but I couldn't see it, and then it hit it. It broke the tree. I think it was kind of partially dead, so it came down pretty hard. It was loud when it snapped it, and
Got
then
it.
I just took off across the highway and took off, went
Okay.
down to it because there's no service there, so I had to go down to one of those yellow boxes.
So how long
And
was it between that incident and when your uncle went back with you?
about a week. It was my birthday. It was on December 6th, 2010.
And so when he went with you, describe exactly what you heard and what you saw.
Okay, so we went. We didn't get to see anything that night. I went down to. I talked to him and I said, hey, I found a good camping spot, and I didn't want to tell him about Bigfoot or anything because then he might try to trick me or something. you know. So, and I don't want that. I want him to go out there with a clean mind. And then so we went out there and we went down into this flood zone, and on the off the service road, and we were getting ready to get ready for the night. So we pitched our tarp, and we got some wood together, and then when it got dark, we were laying down in the A-frame tent thing, and he says, I hear talking. And I go, what do you mean you're talking? And he goes, yeah, but I don't understand what they're saying. And I go, what does it sound like? And he told me, he's all, are you, whatever, like something like that. And I kind of not can't hear that well, but I can hear, I mean, I don't know. It seems like my hearing's worse because everybody else can hear things, but I can't hear them. And so it validated that he is actually hearing a Bigfoot because I've heard that on other videos. I didn't know enough at that point to know what they all sound like, everything, but I heard that, and so I knew he was telling me the truth. And so I was like, okay. So we kind of there's a video out there on it, but I can't find it. I've been hacked so many times, and so we ended up going to sleep. And then around 9 o'clock, it started, or maybe 11 o'clock, it started getting really cold, and the fire went out on us. So we got up, and I put our headlamps on, and we started collecting the wood, and we started the fire up again. And I was sitting on my knee, and he was sitting on a bucket facing me. And off to the left is a huge rock. It's like as big as a house, and behind him is a tent and the water, and to the right is the fire. And so he goes, I hear walking, Lewis. And I'm like, what do you mean walking, like a deer? He's all, no, it's on 2 feet. I hear walking over here by that rock, and it's pitch dark. But in this area where we're talking is the flood zone. But a lot of trees over the years, fall, and then vegetation, and then some other ones fall, and then more. So it's built up in there. So it's really hard to navigate through it. And so I started going and like that, and I did about 7 times. I did that, and then it stepped out, started walking, and then I heard it then, and it took 7 steps from where it was at to the creek. It took me well over 15 the next day, and it crossed the water, which is freezing at December, and walked across and then knocked on a tree, and it was pretty loud knock, and he dropped the log. You can hear it go doof, doof, and he walked across the creek again, and he stood there. I guess I didn't go there to check, and my uncle looked up at me because I gave him a hug. I was like, this only happens on TV. But he took it like, because his mind doesn't go in that direction. He doesn't believe, you know, even anything like that, because I was telling him that's got to be a Bigfoot, you know, and he's like, look at me like, you're trying to trick me. And then he went right to bed, and I'm like, well, I'm not going to stay out here. So I went to bed too, and that was the end of that incident that happened. And that was just validation right there for me that, oh no, this is not over. I'm coming back. And and there's been, and then I just keep coming back and keep coming back. And there's so many different things that's happened especially between me and the baby, the first baby, because they have gotten another one since then. I have a picture of a baby footprint where the toe is divergent like that, and I have my hand next to it. It's probably like maybe a 6 or 7 inch foot, and it's clearly, you could tell it's a. I didn't have any casting stuff or anything. It was right in some wet sand. It was a really nice print. And then I have another one where the mom stepped and the baby's walking into the mom's footprint, and you can see that same shape of that toe. The baby must have turned its foot in the footprint of her mom's or whatever, and left that edge of that her foot in her.
What do you think these things are?
I don't know which one, like the Bigfoots or the
Yeah,
the
yeah, Bigfoot.
Bigfoot. I don't know. I think it's just I don't know. My idea is probably just like cavemen or something back in the day, and they just evolved because they're powerful. I don't know. I mean, they're a little bit of everything. I mean, it seems like they have powers because I had my drone flew out of the sky. It was fully charged, and all my stuff was drained, and it was just crazy. I also have on video also with I was there. Okay, so I went there and I dropped off a recorder, and I put it I put it in a plastic bag, and I rolled it up, and I put it under some leaves right at the gate by the service road, and I buried it, and I got it in the car, and I drove away. I came back in about a week, and I marked my spot, and I went there, and it wasn't there, and I'm like, okay, there was nobody here with me, and so I grabbed a stick and I started rubbing it on the leaves and trying to find my recorder. Well, I found it 5 feet further into the service road, more, and it was still rolled up just like I left it. And I'm like, what the heck? And then my marker's right there. And so I got it, and I listened to it, and you can hear I'm taking it as the being the baby one because of the steps it was taken. It ran down the embankment, ran up and ran down, and it would come up and it would do some stuff with the leaves, and then it would stop, and then you would hear leaves again, and then I was like, okay, and then you can hear them. They had a stick in their hand. I guess it sounded like they broke a stick, and you can hear and scraping on the ground, scraping on the ground, and then it would just do all kinds of weird stuff, just taking off and coming back, and so I guess that's when the Bigfoot, I guess the baby one, was hiding my stuff, unburying it the first time, and then burying it somewhere else.
Other active wildlife in the area that you know of?
Well, all the research I've noticed is that in that area, no deer trails whatsoever from the bridge, and then about half of a football field in. There is not one single deer trail.
What do you think they eat?
Oh, they eat deer. They eat deer. I found, and they eat the fish that get caught up in the pools because the dam opens up, and then the water recedes, and then the fish get caught up inside the puddles. And I found fish skeletons fully attacked, but with all the meat gone on the sand bank when the water drains down. And then you get deer carcasses here and there, bones here and there, but there's no deer trails in the areas that you're finding them, which is in their sleeping area. I know exactly the areas that they sleep in. Like I on my drone, you can see a huge old tree. It's like a pine tree, but it looks really wicked. The mom and the baby sleep in there, up in that area, and then over to the other side of the creek, the dad sleeps on the other side. In my recordings, which I don't have them all because I had a divorce and all my stuff gotten lost in that, through the computer and stuff, and sabotage, because I was really into it, and she didn't kind of like that either. Um, but those recordings are gone, unfortunately. But they would break sticks, um, all day, because I would have recorders out there, and you'd hear them snap, 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 breaking sticks during the day. And then as soon as somebody walks in, I don't hear not one single snap. And I'll be there all day with a recorder on, sitting there on a lawn chair quietly, just sitting, just to see if I hear any of those snaps on the recorder when I go back, and I don't hear anything. But once I'm gone, they start snapping. And then once somebody comes in, they stop. So it's like they're telling each other that somebody's there, I guess. But now what was I going to go back to? What were we talking about?
Yeah, we were talking about what they eat, and you said, and then you
Okay,
were
yeah,
talking about where they sleep.
yeah, and I would like, yeah, I would even take food out there, and they wouldn't even bother my food. Like I bought so much stuff because I had a problem with the baby messing with my recorder a lot. And then when they had another baby, I just couldn't take the recorder out there anymore with them being there. Um, but um, but they would like I would drop off a ton of stuff like fruit, vegetables, sweets, whatever, just to get them off my recorder. And then I put my recorder somewhere and bury it. And then I left. And then when I came back later on, because what I did is I buried the recorder, went up on the embankment to the service road, and started walking. I started talking because I'm recording on the video, and I went all the way down the service road, came back. Well, when I came back to pick it up, you can hear me drop off the recorder, walk up on the service road, and walk away with my dogs. Right away, you can hear that little brat come running up to the recorder, not the food. And then he broke a stick and shoved it in my recorder thing and shipped it up and down. And he did it the whole time that I was gone down the service road. And when he heard me coming back, he stopped. And then he ran back down to his hiding spot. And then I walked by and got in the car and left. And he come running back up and did it some more. And he didn't even touch the food. It was just crazy. But I mean, it just shows you how much control and how much like they're hell bent on not letting anybody know that they're there. It's just kind of crazy. You know.
You ever heard them talk like the Sierra Sounds communication or anything like that?
Yeah, well, actually, what happened? I took my sister out there to show her that Bigfoot tutorial, and they were pretty outgoing that night, and I have that all on video. Unfortunately, I couldn't turn up the thing far enough, but on the thing to hear them talking, I can kind of hear the dad grunt, but to tell the babies to where to go. I'll tell you the story. So we got there, and as soon as we got out, we thought we heard talking, and they were already out. It was dark when we got there, and then we started walking up the service road, and we planted some apples out, and you can see it all on video. And then, on the way back, we were looking at some footprints, and then we heard a twig snap when we got up to the bridge. And then right after that, we heard a grunt from the dad, because we're on top of the bridge now. And then my sister kept looking to the right because that's where the dad sent one of the babies up to the side of the road, and the other one didn't come up yet. And so we walked across the road, and we didn't know he was already up there, or she. And so we're looking around. Angela, my sister, stayed right there, and I walked over to the bridge and then looking down because I kept hearing stuff down there. And because they sent the other baby up to distract us from the first one, I believe, because that just made sense, and because it made a lot of noise down there. And so I went over there, and my sister was sitting there, and you can hear the crickets going, and then all of a sudden it stops, and then all of a sudden you can hear the Bigfoot sniff my sister, and she freaked out. And Lewis, oh my gosh, I got freaked out, and she told me what happened, and I went over there, and I didn't want to. My rule of thumb is at nighttime you stay on the service road or on the bridge. You don't go down in their area, and that's why they feel so comfortable about coming out, when I'm there. And so I'm like, after they did that, I looked around, but I didn't cross over the guardrail and go look. And then right after that, we went back across the highway. They ran back down, and then I was on the standing on the rail looking over, right over the water, but you couldn't really see it. We have flashlights and stuff. And I started making some whooping sounds and things like that. And the other ones, the baby started doing it back, you know. And it was pretty cool because that was like the most they've done in one night for me, you know. Usually they'll do something like, tap rocks, or they'll run by, slap my tent, or something like that, but never like sit there and vocalize it with me or something. I don't know. It's kind of weird, but yeah, it was pretty neat.
How many times have you been out there and had these experiences?
Um, well, not like that, like what I was doing right there. Not like right on, you know, right at the time I'm there, they're doing it. Not very often that happens, but I'm there, like it happened, like, you know, I don't know, about a dozen times maybe while I'm there. But I mean, like, they're there. They're like, they'll throw a rock or just snap. But usually when I come up, they'll run off, and I'll get a footprint, or this and that, or that day, the next day when I came back or whatever, they had apples. We had apples out there, and I was sitting there looking at my trail camera, and I had ran out of space on my phone. I was sitting on the ground in the dirt on my foot, and I had my other foot sticking straight out. And I was looking through the pictures on my trail camera, hoping to catch whatever it was on that took the apples. Well, my camera was too far away to catch it on night vision to the apples that were, the distance. And I was sitting there for, oh man, I was there for a little while, a couple hours, and there was like 1,000, 1,500 pictures or something like that. And I was going through them, and zooming in on them and all that stuff. And all of a sudden, I hear leaves moving, and this is broad daylight now. This is different than what usually happens. And I thought, wow, there's a deer here. That's kind of weird because there's never a deer in this area. I mean, I flew my drone over, and if you could see the aerial shots, you'll never see a. It's all on my channels too. You'll never see a deer trail there, and and all of a sudden, the blood just went cold because it was like it was walking down the mountain, not very far away, on 2 feet. I was like, I didn't know what to do because it would never happen like that. Usually I hear that at night, and it really doesn't bother me too much at night because I don't have to see it coming. If they're going to get me, they're just going to get me, you know. But during the day, I don't want to see it coming. I don't want to see these things in person.
Have you ever witnessed, actually seeing one personally?
I don't want to. So I don't want to see one. I know it sounds weird because it'll ruin my research. Because I like going out there at night, and because I get more activity. But if I have that image in my mind of what they look like, I may not want to go back out there. But I do got one on camera. I have the male on picture. I stood right there, and I was intently looking because I knew I was being watched. And well, anyway, the one that came down, she came down the mountain and then walked along the vegetation, and and then she stopped at these rocks, and I was on the ground, like laying down, like I'm like, why am I laying down? So I got up and I got my stuff together, and I'm shaking, my camera's all and then I ended up going over there, and I was gonna head out, and I got enough courage, and I got my phone to erase everything because I was trying to. At the time it was coming down, I was trying to videotape, but my card was full, my phone was full, so I was trying to delete everything on my phone just to start recording because if it pops out, I want to see it on my camera if it has to come out. This way at least I have it on video. And uh and and then I deleted everything, and then I got scared because she started taking like two really slow steps right at the end, like she was gonna pop out, and I just couldn't do it. So I yelled at her and said, "Don't come out." and and so I walked over there, and I was gonna head out, and I just thought, you know what, I'm gonna just see if I can see her through the trees. That's the best I can do right now, is I don't want to see it. And then so I'm looking, trying to do it. And then somehow she told the male and to come out from behind me. And then I heard him crossing the creek behind me. And he started moving back toward behind me. And so I just got out of there. And that's when I found the tapping holes down on the service road where I left the donuts. You'll see on that video where I left the donuts. They took the donuts, and the baby. Remember, I told you it taps on the ground all the time with sticks. Well, this they do that a lot, and get a stick and they tap 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 and they scrape and tap tap tap. I don't know why they do it, but I'm pretty sure they get bored. But they left tapping holes on the ground, and you could see those on the video too. And I was like, that's when I was being rushed out from that incident that next day.
I'm interested in all aspects of the paranormal, especially these areas that sometimes we call high strangeness areas or portals or windows, whatever term you want to use, where several different types of phenomena seem to occur in the same place.
Well, exactly. And I run into that a lot. I primarily interview people about Bigfoot, but it kind of crosses over into a lot of this unusual and paranormal information. So, what can you tell us about that?
Well, it just seems that people that have these experiences, a lot of them are associated with, high strangeness aspects. A really striking example was in 1973 and 74. There were a wave of Bigfoot sightings in Pennsylvania, southwest Pennsylvania. Very bizarre Bigfoot sightings, along with strange lights in the sky and things that even looked like perhaps some kind of a spacecraft or whatever. But people would see these things. Sometimes they would leave three-toed footprints, not the conventional five-toe. And there was an incident where a lady heard some commotion. This is in the midst of this huge flap. She heard some commotion on her porch, and she thought dogs were getting into her trash again. And she opened the door, and she saw what she described as a gorilla. She didn't have the Bigfoot reference. She shot it point blank with her shotgun, and it disappeared in a flash of light. So there are, and there was another really classic sighting where 15 people saw this strange object in the sky, and the one guy followed the craft over to another farm, and he saw it land. And then off to his left, he saw a couple of these strange looking Bigfoots. They had green glowing eyes. They had very long arms, and they were making a sound kind of like a baby crying. And he shot a couple of tracer bullets over them. One didn't seem to have any effect. The other one of the creatures reached up to grab it. And at that moment, that craft or light or whatever it was that was seen to be on the ground completely vanished. And he called the state police in. A state trooper saw one of these things. And now afterwards, he called in Stan Gordon. Stan Gordon wrote the book Silent Invasion, which covers this and that entire flap in those years. And he was out there in the field. Everything was gone by then. He was out there in the field describing to Stan and his crew what had happened. Then all of a sudden he has kind of a fit. He's stamping his feet. He's growling. His father thought he was being possessed by a Bigfoot, and then he collapses. And then afterwards, when he comes to, it was not like a fugue. He had no memory of what he had done, but in his mind's eye, he saw a Grim Reaper type figure giving him prophecies about the future. And after that, he started to have psychic impressions of things like plane crashes and so forth. Just bizarre. And there are other situations where more, I don't know, you call them more conventional Bigfoots, I guess, that seem to be translucent sometimes. Ron Moorhead, who was spent many years in the Sierra Nevadas, going out to a particular spot, and he recorded what they call the Sierra sounds. These incredible sounds of apparently Bigfoot, but he had all kinds of other, batteries would drain. They would see strange lights around there. So, sometimes people have just sort of a, in quotes, normal paranormal experience, but so often people have all this other, some other very, very high strangeness aspects to it. And sometimes people were very reluctant to talk about the stranger aspects because, if you see a Bigfoot or some kind of an unknown animal, that might be hard enough to believe anyway. And then if you add the really high strangeness aspects, then you don't really sound credible at all.
That's true. Yeah, you kind of lose that audience of being able to really perceive what it is you're even talking about because it's
Yes.
so far out of the norm of our daily experiences for most of us anyway. Well, tell me about Mothman because I don't know a lot about that.
Well, one of the first major sightings occurred on November 15th, 1966. It was seen before that. I think even a couple of years before that, people reported something like the Mothman. But two couples were out in what they call the TNT area. Now, the TNT area is about 9 miles north of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. And that used to be the ordnance works. They used to create explosives and TNT for the war effort during World War II. If you look at the old photographs, you'll see these a huge complex of buildings and everything. It was all very, very secret. And but by the mid 60s, most of those buildings were gone. And nowadays it's just the McClintock Wildlife Area. But there wasn't, people, they would go out there and drag race and so forth. Well, these two married couples were out there one night and they were going by the Old North power plant, and which was kind of a ruin. And while they were driving along the road, this dirt road, Linda Scarberry said, "What's that man doing standing in the road?" Well, that man, all of a sudden, spread his wings, and it was kind of shuffling off toward the Old North power plant. And at this time, they weren't too terrified or freaked out, but it was really kind of a shock. So they started to go back into town, and then this thing seemed to be following them. They saw it perched in front of a billboard at first when they left. It seemed like they thought there might even be more than one because it was so quick. And then as they went south on Route 62 into Point Pleasant, it started to follow them. So they took off at very high speeds. And this thing was about 6-7 foot tall, man-like, about a 10-foot wingspan. And the thing that really kind of got to them was the red glowing eyes. So it chased them to the city limits, and they eventually went to the police department. They separated all of them and got their stories, which all matched up. And so that particular sighting hit the wire services, went all over the world. I was in junior high in Michigan at the time, and when I read about it, this is even before Mothman had a proper name. He was just the locals just called it the bird, and then many other people started seeing it. John Keel got wind of this. He had come down from New York City. He was a journalist and very interested in the unexplained and UFOs and so forth. And so he came down about 5 different times during that year between November 66 and December 67. December 67 is when the Silver Bridge collapsed, kind of marking the end of this era, but not completely. People were still seeing and experiencing things. So Keel chronicled a little over 100 people that saw this, and most of them described it the same way. Not everybody. There was one witness named Tom Urey that essentially saw a thunderbird. I mean, this thing had a 10 to 12 foot wingspan, but it was a giant bird. He said it was completely unrecognizable. It wasn't an osprey. It wasn't anything very conventional. So and then there were many other things were going on at the time. You had strange lights passing overhead all the time. A lot of people that saw the Mothman had an outbreak of poltergeist phenomena after they went home. And people ask, I mean, John Keel couldn't tell you for sure what the Mothman was. It presented kind of a paradox, because sometimes it would be seen and it would put its wings behind it and then take off like a helicopter, but not flapping its wings. Some people, Keel got a couple reports of people that saw it in close proximity, but it sounded like it was giving off some kind of a humming noise, or maybe something mechanical. One of the early witnesses, Connie Carpenter, saw it by the Mason County Golf Course, and she saw this thing standing there. It took off straight like a helicopter, and then came up and flew over her car. The thing that really got to her were the red glowing eyes. And the next day, she suffered a case of conjunctivitis. Now, the eye burn is something that is often associated with close encounters with UFOs, strange lights, or whatever. But in this case, it was a cryptid. And it's interesting because John Keel had unearthed all kinds of interesting patterns in these things. And he said that he found that people that had cryptid experiences or UFO experiences sometimes suffered from the same physical effects, like muscle ache, thirst, and conjunctivitis. So that was pretty interesting. There were several different classic sightings of this thing. Sometimes they were seen of Mothman. Sometimes they saw it in conjunction with a strange light in the sky or nearby. Not necessarily suggesting, some people thought, well, maybe Mothman's an alien somehow, coming out of some kind of a spacecraft, and that doesn't seem to fit. But these different types of phenomena all seem to occur at the same time.
What do you think Mothman and Bigfoot and all of these, what do you think they are?
Well, I guess as someone who, I'm pretty much a Keelian. Now, John Keel, the first thing that struck him was that when you get into UFOs and some of these entities that seem to be coming out of these craft, while you get the general cigar-shaped UFOs, classic flying saucers, egg-shaped, and so forth. Very few of them were identical. And so he postulated the idea of window areas, that these things may be coming through and going back and forth. But also he went further in Operation Trojan Horse, and that's where he tries to pull all these things together. He talked about some of these things perhaps being temporal, paraphysical. He used the term that I love, transmogrifications of energy. He thought that perhaps in some cases, the only, in quotes, solid or real aspect of these were the strange meandering lights you would see. People would see the light sometimes, perhaps being programmed, and some would see a giant hairy biped walking across the road. Others might see a giant black triangle in the sky. But he also thought that some of these things were, actually temporarily physical. And so, I mean, if he's onto something there, then perhaps the shape of some of these things aren't really important. It's he was interested in what he called the cosmic mechanism behind these things. And so sometimes I think maybe they're monsters from the id, so to speak. I don't know if you ever saw Forbidden Planet, classic sci-fi. The MacGuffin was where this ancient race was extinct, and they had determined and figured out how to turn thoughts into things with their technology. But what they forgot were monsters from the id. So they were destroyed by the deep monsters within their subconscious. Sometimes I wonder if we're dealing with something like that. Keel thought perhaps there was a sort of a co-creation. If you go back in time, the strange meandering lights were always thought of as something different, sometimes fairy lights. I mean, there was even a time when they believed that some of these lights were lanterns carried by witches on their broom. And then, eventually it evolved to the UFOs we were seeing were always a little bit ahead of our time. In 1897, and there were several other flaps of these majestic airships that would be seen, kind of very dirigible-like, but almost like something out of Jules Verne. And but ahead of our technology, ahead of any Zeppelin or dirigible that we were able to develop. And then came the lights and the ghost planes, they called them, over Sweden. And then the Foo Fighters, the strange lights that would follow World War II planes. And then more to the present, we got sort of more of a conventional, almost a science fiction view of these craft landing and their occupants. So but on the other hand, Keel and I think that some of these cryptids may very well be unknown animals in some cases. We may be dealing with both. And if that's the case, it's going to be very hard to separate them. But Keel talked about paranormal mimicry. And I wonder, do we have some real flesh and blood Bigfoots, excuse me, off in the Northwest? And these bizarre Bigfoots we saw in Pennsylvania in the early 70s, almost like a counterfeit of them. If there's something in human consciousness that copies or mimics some of these things. So it's a really tough road to go down. I mean, I have been on both sides of this. In the old days, I was very happy with the ETH, the extraterrestrial hypothesis. And when I first encountered Keel's Trojan horse, I was a little upset. He was kind of upsetting the apple cart there. I was very, very comfortable with my ideas, my hypotheses. So the best answer is I don't really know what they are, but they do leave footprints. They leave, UFOs leave physical marks and burns and so forth. There is something very physical and real to them. And again, on the other hand, we may be dealing with a separate group that is in fact nuts and bolts and flesh and blood.
Certainly a mystery around this, and it doesn't seem as if it's going to be solvable really soon. What research out there do you think would give us the best hope of getting some answers?
Well, the best thing we can do is listen to the experiencer. So often we go in with preconceived ideas, and you'll have, I've talked to people like Stan Gordon, and he would talk to people that have talked to other witnesses. I mean, that had their own experience and had talked to other researchers. And when they said, we're talking about their Bigfoot encounter, they said, well, we also saw this strange light in the sky. They didn't want to hear about the light. They wanted to hear about that Bigfoot, and vice versa. If somebody saw a Bigfoot in conjunction with perhaps a landed UFO or whatever, they didn't want to hear about the Bigfoot. They wanted to hear about the craft from Alpha Centauri. So what we need to do now, of course, we're always trying to qualify the individual. Are they making something up? Do they see something mundane that they've misinterpreted? But we have to listen to the experiencer and not simply reject the high strangeness aspects. Then, and the other thing, and the other thing is that I firmly believe, and I have seen it many times, if we do that, if we catalog all this, we will find different parallels, connections uh, in some of these things. And this goes from, over time, geography, and different types of phenomena. Let me give you an example. We're familiar with vehicle stoppages with close proximity of UFOs. We assume that the electromagnetic system in the craft interferes with the combustion engine somehow. Well, there's other things that stop vehicles. There was a case in about 1960. A woman named Dorothy Strong is in a taxi cab in Northumberland, England, and all of a sudden the cab stalls. The fare meter is going crazy, and they feel like they're being kind of hit by an invisible force field. Well, when they look outside, they see there's a phantom army that has manifested, and as it gets closer to the taxi cab, it starts to disappear. And it turns out it was the Battle of Otterburn from 1388. The reason they know this is because it has manifested before, and they can tell by the uniforms and so forth what period it belonged to. Well, the Phantom Army disappears, and then everything goes back to normal. We can think of probably in Gettysburg, there have been phantom platoons and phantom soldiers seen there as well. Well, that stalled a car, whatever happened there. Now, here's another weird one. Let's get us back to cryptids. A man named W.D. Doc Priestley was cruising along a two-lane near Marlington, West Virginia, near the state forest. And all of a sudden, his car rolls to a stop. It's stalled. Well, he looks off to his left and he sees a classic Bigfoot standing there. And its hair even seems to be kind of standing up a little bit, like with static electricity. And he says he doesn't know how long he stared at this thing, but his buddies that were ahead of him in a hunting buzz eventually realized he wasn't behind him, and they were turning around, coming back. The Bigfoot recedes into the woods. He's able to start his car again. Well, they take off again. He says nothing about his experience, and at least at this point. And then he starts to take off again. And then his car I don't know how far he got, but his car starts to stall and spark, and his engine burns out, looks off to his left, and there is the same Bigfoot or his kissing cousin standing there. Now, the funny part of this is he says nothing for months. Eventually, he tells his story, but he did not want his hunting buddies to know, because he wanted to come back to that area and hunt again, and he was afraid that if he told them, that it would scare them away and they wouldn't come. And let me give you one more. Now, I don't know if this is true or not. It happened a long time ago, if it did, but it's my favorite vehicle stoppage of all time. It was in the late 1800s or early 1900s. A man named Elliot O'Donnell was basically a paranormal researcher. He wrote all kinds of fascinating books on ghosts and missing people and so forth. Well, this incident, he said, happened to his uncle. He calls him Mr. B in the book Ghostland, and he's on a haunted road going toward Limerick, and he's in a cart, a single horse cart, and his servant named Dunkley is driving the cart. Well, as they're going along, all of a sudden the horse stops dead, and Mr. B looks around. Dunkley is it looks like he's got a look of terror on his face. He can't function. He's in a stupor. And Mr. B looks down and sees these little shadowy, translucent forms swarming the cart. He has no idea what it is. So he turns around, grabs the reins, breaks the spell, and takes off. So eventually Dunkley comes out of it, and he asked him, "What did you see?" And in Dunkley's mind's eye, he said he saw a troop of dancing fairies making merry. And apparently, if you come across the fairies making merry, that's not a good thing. They don't like it. So again, in his mind's eye, they were climbing on the cart, trying to pull him off. And this poor guy looks he's in terror. And it was interesting that they reported that if it's true, they had a shared experience but perceived it differently. And how many times have we heard about that in, abduction experiences, people seeing a strange object in the sky, but not everybody seeing it or even seeing the same thing. And even if you look at the Betty and Barney Hill case, the classic abduction experience from the early 60s, they had a shared experience. Much of it was similar, but part of it, Barney was had his eyes closed or was asleep, and while Betty was completely alert during the whole thing. And they didn't even not everything was quite the same. Betty saw the aliens with a kind of slits for a nose. Barney saw them with more of a Jimmy Durante nose. Now, many people out there may not know who Jimmy Durante was, but he had a prominent nose. So anyway, it's just very, very interesting to follow these patterns, and different experiences, different times, different places, and different types of phenomena.
Some of what you were describing kind of reminded me of, different eras of time that kind of intersect in these moments. What can you tell us about that?
With like time distortions.
Yes. Like when
Um,
the battles, kind of came along, and it's like these time intersections kind of woven together that creates this bizarre energy.
yes, I don't know why a particular battle or a particular event would manifest. Sometimes it's much more mundane. There was it was in England. They were doing I can't remember the year, but they were doing renovations, and they started to see Roman soldiers marching through the room that they were in. Only their feet were they were kind of sunken in the floor. Whatever road they were on was lower than where the building was at that time. And there would be several of them that would show up. Now, these were just like imprints. They were not interactive at all. So there's that's a good question. I mean, why do certain events manifest and others don't? I mean, if you could imagine if we had everything that could repeat or manifest, we wouldn't we wouldn't even be able to function. We would be like a 2000 movies in front of our face. So yeah, I really don't have an answer for that. I don't know why that and again, for the most part, there's no interaction, so it suggests it's just kind of an imprint.
Would this be similar to maybe a ghost imprint that where one can just see an image and it repeats maybe in a certain area, but doesn't necessarily interact?
Right, yes, yes.
Well, have you had any experiences with the ghost phenomena?
Well, I had a weird experience once. I went one night, I went alone into the TNT area, and with my camera and everything, and did not experience anything. But driving back, I was going to drive back to my motel, which was on the other side of the Ohio River in Gallipolis, Ohio, and I experienced a couple flashes of light, like a strobe, and I don't know what it was, and I didn't have the presence of mind to try and think, well, where was this along this road? I can come back tomorrow and see if there's anything that would explain it. But anyway, I got back to my motel room. Now, I'm the person that nothing ever happens to. I have to talk to other people about their experiences. So I got into I opened up the door to the motel. The TV set turned on by itself and started flipping through channels steadily. And I thought, no, this doesn't happen to me. So I didn't know what to do or what to make of it. I unplugged the TV and went to bed. A lot of times people do that. They have these bizarre experiences. I know a couple that saw a large black triangle pass overhead, and they thought, "Oh, that's interesting." And then they went to bed, and then later on, they thought, "Well, what was that all about?" So, and then strangely enough, a year later, I went with a couple buddies of mine. Were crammed in a room next to the one I was in the year before, trying to save some money. And that night, the TV set turned on. Now, these were older style TVs. They weren't the smart TVs, and just turned on. And so we tried to get scientific this time. We tried to use the remote through the wall and all that stuff to see if it would come on. The next day, one of my friends and I went in the motel for some reason or other. The TV set turned on and then flipped through a couple channels. So, I don't know what to make of that. And then the conclusion to this, a few years later at a Mothman festival, in the next room, so this all happened in the one corner of this motel. Two of our friends are sharing a bigger room there in the corner, and they had a smart TV, one of these bigger, newer TVs, and they were having trouble with the volume. And they would have to keep turning it up, and then it would start to blast, and then they'd have to go through the process again. Well, then all of a sudden, a pop can, a soda can, was sitting on a nightstand there, and it fell off the table without it being touched or bumped. So I have no idea. If I brought back something with me from the TNT area, and it was essentially, it's an ancient burial ground, that area, some of the battles that were there. Fortunately, it seems to still be there flipping channels and did not come home with me. So that was the, I've seen a couple strange things in the sky, but I'm the kind of person where virtually nothing happens to.
Well, that reminds me of the hitchhiker phenomena. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I've heard that where somebody will pick up somebody along the road, and at some point they will disappear, along the in the car, and it's hard to know what to make. It seemed to be physical to a point. I mean, they get in the car, they converse and everything, and then they vanish.
Yes. What can you tell me about other cryptids that you've studied or have knowledge of?
Well, there is a set that I call the one-offs, and ones that are only seen once or twice. I mean, we have all kinds of Bigfoot reports. We have all kinds of winged cryptid reports. Not necessarily the Mothman per se, but there was the Houston Batman in the 50s. There was the Wisconsin Man Bat in the 90s, a big ugly bat-like thing, and the father and son that saw it got sick afterwards. But there was the Dover Demon in the mid 60s, I think, in Dover, Massachusetts. Somebody saw this thing crawling along a stone wall. It looked kind of like a undernourished gray, much paler. And somebody else saw it the next day, and then that's it. Nobody ever reported anything. There was no light or craft associated with it. There was the Loveland Frogman, was seen a couple times in 1972 by police officers near the Miami River, and it was also seen once or something like it in the 50s. And if you go way back, there's Native American tradition of some kind of a amphibian-like creature out there, but almost never seen. And then there's the in the 70s, there was what they call the Enfield Horror in Illinois. This thing was seen by two people. They heard something scratching on the door. They open it up. Here's this thing standing there. It's got 3 legs. It's got 2 arms protruding from its chest and pink glowing eyes. And it was seen by one other person. One of them even took a shot at it. But it's almost like a friend of mine, Zelia Edgar, who's also a Keelian. She calls these things, if they are transmogrifications of energy, she calls them lost in transmogrification, which is a great phrase. It's almost like these things come out of the phantom menagerie, and sometimes they come out, nicely shaped like your classic Bigfoot or some kind of a winged creature or a chupacabra or whatever. And other times it's almost like a patchwork quilt cryptid being put together. So, but they all seem, there's the Jersey Devil, and there's also people believe there's a Bigfoot presence there in the Pine Barrens. And again, a lot of these creatures just don't work biologically, yet people see them year after year. So I tend to think, and the phantom menagerie comes from Dr. Donald Oman, who was a priest, and he's the one that went to exorcise Nessie, and he also made an attempt to exorcise the Bermuda Triangle. Well, anyway, that's his term. So I tend to think of maybe some of these things coming out of this. I don't know, this phantom menagerie that may be part of our collective unconscious or fears or whatever. So some of these just don't seem like they can be real flesh and blood biological creatures. So many of these things may come from the same source. They may come from the same origin.
Have you or anyone that you know of done any type of a study about people who do have these experiences, who do see these things? Where the subject of the experience, or, if they're creating or co-creating some of this out there, has there ever been a study of the people?
Well, Keel was very keen on that sort of thing. He had a catchphrase. He said, "Ask the contactee what they had for breakfast." Now, what he meant was ask the experiencer all, find out all about them, all about their life, because he found that people that were having these experiences were having other kinds of phenomena happen to them. And if I was frozen back in the 60s thinking that this is just ET, you don't ask people all these other questions. I'll give you an example. There's a woman that contacted me on Facebook a few years ago, Missy, and she and her husband, they were near Londonderry, New Hampshire, not too far from an airport, and they were standing out on the front porch early one morning. It was still dark, and they saw these lights. They were very familiar with so many of the lights that would land at the airport, and they saw these lights coming toward them that they didn't recognize. And then all of a sudden, they're not standing next to each other anymore on the porch, and it's a little bit lighter, and they look up and they see this giant black triangle so low it's touching the tops of the trees, and then it moves off. And this is the couple that at that moment it didn't register. They went back to bed. Later on, she realized that they were missing about a half hour. So she went on a quest to find a therapist or somebody that could unlock that. But before that happened, she contacted me. So I asked her a series of John Keel style questions. And to make a long story short, I found out that they were experiencing haunting phenomena in their house. Both her sons were experiencing orb phenomena. The youngest were seeing these golden orbs dancing outside his window at night when he went to bed. The older son saw a orb come toward him in the house, circle him, and then move off into another part of the house. She saw a shadow person moving along the wall once. Now, and then I asked her, I said, this is going to sound weird, but I know that some people that have had these kinds of experiences have also seen a cryptid at one time or another. So I said, have you ever seen anything like a Bigfoot or some kind of an animal you couldn't identify? And she said, no. And then she said, oh, wait a minute. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law, they saw something near the property. And this thing was seen twice. And what they saw was something like a black panther, but standing on two legs. This is in New Hampshire. So, I would have missed all that if I had just had a narrow field of vision that I had in the 60s. And Keel found that this was common. I mean, people would get strange phone calls, mechanical voices, and even some of the Men in Black phenomena would follow some of this. She said that they had a black car. They lived in a cul-de-sac. They had a black car come down their road one time with tinted windows, and it was driving very slowly and just turned around and then left. I mean, this may have been some kind of a government thing. I don't know. But anyway, that yes, oftentimes, and I talked to another lady that was having missing time and abduction experiences. She'd also seen a Bigfoot. So these things just seem to, and you don't have to force it. You don't have to imagine it. It does seem that these things just kind of line up, and you'll if you honestly investigate these things, these patterns just seem to fall into place.
Yeah, that's what I've experienced in just questioning of people with Bigfoot. If you ask the question, generally they've had a lot of varied experiences and almost always have seen orbs and lights and craft and various other things like that. So
Right.
I think that's fairly common. What else can you tell us? What else has your research and your knowledge taken you into that my audience might want to hear?
Well, and another aspect about people researching patterns. There is a researcher named Ahmad Jamaluddin who wrote a book. It was something like 60 years of suppressed evidence, and it's about the humanoid reports, the landings, and so forth. Now, he took Albert Rosales's database. Albert Rosales has about 15 books out from his database called Humanoids, the Others Amongst Us. And so Jamaluddin took that database and he found certain patterns. Now, Keel had done the same thing. He found that for some reason, UFO reports would peak on a Wednesday. What kind of sense does that make? But anyway, Jamaluddin found that there are different times of the day that it's much more likely, if you're going to see a landed craft with a humanoid, it would be between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. 12 noon, forget it. You can eat your lunch and not worry about missing a landing. But he also found that this was true in every time zone, suggesting that whatever this is, a point of entry, point of manifestation, stays fixed while the world turns. Not only that, he found that these what did he call them? Humanoid migrations. He found that they go through 8 to 10 year cycles. They start you'll have a flap in South America, and then at some point, maybe a year or two later, it'll move up to North America, maybe the US or Canada. Then it goes across the ocean, UK or Europe, and then Asia, Malaysia, and then back around again, like that's the primary, most of the landings and so forth show up like that. And again, if nothing else, all this suggests that people are not hallucinating. There's some kind of hidden purpose or whatever. John Keel thought that a lot of these things were a part of a natural condition of the planet. We weren't necessarily dealing with ET. In fact, toward the end of the 60s, he had rejected the ET idea, but later on backtracked a little bit. He was convinced there was more than one thing going on. So there's and what else? There's another pattern I can talk about. Of course, you're familiar with the Skinwalker Ranch and the book, The Hunt for the Skinwalker by George Knapp and Colin Kelleher. One of the incidents was with the Sherman family that owned it were high-end cattle ranchers, and they had these 4 or 5 black Angus bulls, and they were all penned up, and he and his wife Gwen were in another part of the now this is in the midst of UFO sightings, cattle mutilations, strange disembodied voices, strange creatures. I mean, this was a 3-ring circus of the paranormal. Well, they were out somewhere mending a fence or something like that, and when they were driving back, Gwen says out loud, "I pray nothing ever happens to those bulls." Well, of course, they got there, the pen's locked up, there's no footprints, and there's no bulls. So they're frantic. And Terry Sherman is looking all over. He's drawn to this rusty old trailer that they've never used. It was just left there from before. And he looks inside and he sees the bulls in there. They're alive, but they're in kind of a stupor. And so he's pounding on the door. They wake up. They kick themselves out of this, and it takes hours for them to corral them again. Well, interesting. If you look at, there's another area of, again, all kinds of high strangeness. in Dyfed, Wales, Southwest Wales in 77. They were seeing 7 foot tall silver suited beings. They saw associated with these egg-shaped craft. They also saw these little guys that almost looked like leprechauns, about 3 feet tall, slanted eyebrows and curved noses. So all kinds of stuff was going on there. And the Coombs family, they were cattle ranchers, and they were at the Ripperston farm. And one night he had like about 100 cattle all penned up, and the next morning they're gone, and the bolts in place and the strap and everything. And they find them that they're a half-mile away at the Broadmoor farm. Now somebody said, "Oh, somebody played a joke. They let them out." The problem is that they have to actually go right by the window where they sleep. And another thing is, you would have had to lead them over there because you have to make a 90-degree angle turn to get to the Broadmoor farm. So they thought, well, if I'm going to pull a prank, I think maybe I'll just tip over an outhouse or something. That seems like a lot of work. So a few days later, he separates 16 of the cows and puts them in a separate pen. He goes in to start the milking machines. He comes back and they're gone. They're the same place. They're a half-mile away at the Broadmoor farm. It's interesting that well, let me give you one more case. On my show, I do the high strangeness factor on the Paranormal UK radio network, and I had a couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to talk to police officers from Todd Morden and Alan Godfrey, and he was in 1980. He got a call from a lady that said that they saw these cattle. They're in a kind of a gated community where the gate is locked, and they wonder how they got there. Well, he thought it was a joke. Well, so he gets out there, and the lady he talks to, she said, "Look, I might be old, but I'm not crazy." And she also saw some strange light vanish over the hill. So he and his partner go, they check it out. Sure enough, there's these cattle there. And they had to cross a stream and get past this lock gate to get in there. No explanation. But anyway, his partner goes back, and then Alan is driving back, and he sees a classic flying saucer UFO. He even sketches it on his pad while he's sitting there in the car. And eventually he goes back to the precinct, and he realizes he's missing maybe a half-hour time. So he gets to schedules a therapist a couple months later. And it was kind of a classic abduction experience, he doesn't remember getting on how he got on board the craft. But the man there was very, very normal. He's dressed in white robes, calls himself Yosef. Now, there's these little guys around him that might be grays, I don't know, but Alan said they were so hideous looking he couldn't look at them. And then he's under hypnosis. He's describing what's going on, and he says, "There's a bloody dog in here, and it's hideous." There was a large black dog about the size of a German Shepherd in a spaceship? And Jenny Randalls, great British researcher who first reported on this, couldn't help but see the reference to the black shuck, the black spectral dog that haunts the moors and the castle ruins in England. Now, these are all cases of animal displacement. Back to it was Randall Pugh and F.W. Holliday that wrote the Dyfed Enigma. They saw all kinds of parallels with elements of folklore and some of the modern day UFO experiences that were going on. For example, some of the people that were in close proximity to these 7-foot tall silver suited beings contracted some kind of a strange dermatological condition. Well, there's something also called elf burn or elf disease. Can't say that's the same thing or not, but and again, you even had these little guys that look kind of like the fairies or the elementals. But they found a tradition in Norwegian folklore, and again, they weren't being dogmatic about this. It was just a possibility. It was the story about the milkmaid that put her cow in the pen went to get her pail and comes back, and the cow is gone. And she kept having this problem. Eventually, one of the little people come to her and says, "You can't put your cow there. It's spoiling our food." So Pugh and Holiday, on the speculation train, wonder if perhaps these elementals derive their food from earth energies, and perhaps the proximity of livestock would interrupt that somehow. And they devote a chapter to that kind of thing. But I have to wonder because, almost the moment Gwen Sherman said, "I pray nothing ever happens to those bulls," it did. Almost like the trickster was rearing his ugly head. There were so many things, poltergeist type phenomena on the Skinwalker Ranch, post hole diggers disappearing that were right behind Terry Sherman. Found it a few weeks later, way up in the tree, in the branches of a tree. Just bizarre. So that's just another one of these. People so often just look at one bizarre incident, but don't necessarily connect them all together. And I think many of these things do actually connect. It's an old cliche, but you go down the rabbit hole and you're never going to return. I do the High Strangeness Factor podcast on the Paranormal UK Radio Network, and there's about 4 years of shows there with a bit of a hiatus. I'm also a correspondent on Mac Maloney's Military X-Files on the same network and other platforms. So yeah, if there's I enjoyed it, and I would be glad to come back anytime.